Good afternoon, YouTube, and welcome back to the Suburban Proletarian. My name is Greg, and in today's installment, we're going to be talking about an analog chronograph from Victorinox's Chrono Classic series. This is the model 241658. It is a pretty classic chronograph. I wouldn't call it a heritage model because Victorinox, although it's a very old line Swiss company and they've been doing precision manufacturing for years, they're not really a watch company, are they? I mean, they have been for the last 30 or 40 years, but they don't really have any heritage models to hark back to. So this watch cops a lot of design elements from other watches. I'll go over that in the tabletop section. I will go over that in the tabletop segment of this installment, but I also want to talk more broadly about analog chronographs in general. Do they make sense? What's their purpose on today's watch market? And we'll see. I don't know. You might not agree with me, but I'm going to throw my thoughts out there anyway. Before we move over to the tabletop, let's do the obligatory wristwatch check. Today I am wearing my Deep Blue Sundiver 3. This has been a really nice watch. My wife bought this for me for my birthday, I believe 2 or 3 years ago. It's not a watch I'll probably do a review on. It's a watch you'll probably be seeing in some comparos and things like that, but I know that Deep Blue is sort of a divisive company. They're not really, it's one of those micro brands that kind of puts certain people off. Some people love them, some people hate them. There's not too many people that are ambiguous about Deep Blue. I love this watch. I wanted an orange dialed diver, and as it turns out, I got this watch before I really got super into the Watch You Seek forums and the various Facebook groups, and so I didn't really know an awful lot about Deep Blue, and I just bought it because I liked it. I wanted the orange dial with the black bezel ring, and I couldn't find one, not in my price range, not at a price that I could talk my wife into. So I found the orange dial, orange bezel on clearance. I think they had discontinued it. I found it on clearance. I suggested it to my wife. She kindly bought it for me for my birthday, and when I opened the box, it was the orange dial and the black bezel. I don't think my wife pulled a switcheroo on me because she knew that I preferred the black bezel. I think that whoever, I don't even remember who exactly I bought it from now, but whoever I did buy it from made a mistake and sent me the wrong bezel color, which was actually the bezel color I preferred. So I was pretty happy about that. It's got a nice Seiko movement in it. I think it's an NH36. I haven't actually been running it against the WatchTech app a lot as of yet. I think I ran it for 2 days now, and it's averaging like plus 20 seconds per day. So that's not great, but it's not terrible. But for a 21.6 Seiko movement that hasn't been professionally adjusted, it's not bad. It's certainly well within the specs of what you'd expect from a, run-of-the-mill sort of mechanical watch. But that's enough to talk about this. We're not really here to talk about the Deep Blue. We're here to talk about this Victorinox. So let's move over to the tabletop and take a closer look at this and some of its features and why I have it. Let's do it. All right, guys, so here it is. As you can see, I've made the decision to go with the white cotton gloves again. I'm always torn between looking like a pretentious dick by wearing the white gloves or getting fingerprints all over the crystal as I did in my most recent Certina video. So being a museum professional, I'm going to stick with the white cotton gloves. If you want to make fun of me, that's fine. But anyway, here it is, the Victorinox Chrono Classic. Now, as I stated before, this is only one watch in the Chrono Classic series. They're all basically the same watch. Some have leather bands, different dial colors. This one's called a champagne dial, although it's really a gilt dial. It looks about as gold can be. When I think of champagne, I think of maybe pearlescent or brushed finish in a slightly off-white, yellowish tone. This is straight up gold. As the name implies, as the Chrono Classic name implies, I think they were going for sort of a heritage look. But of course, Victorinox doesn't have any heritage models. Well, they do have a heritage model, which came out in 1989. I think it's called the original. They're still manufacturing it today. So they didn't want to, if you want to make a really classic looking watch and you're a company like Victorinox, which has been around for a long time but hasn't been making watches for a long time, you've got to end up copying a bunch of design features from other people. And that's exactly what they did. The dial's pretty much dictated by the ETA G10 chronograph movement. The sub-dial placement is pretty much carved in stone there when you use a factory movement. So you've got 3 sub-dials. You've got one that will measure minutes as the chronograph's running, up to 30 minutes. You've got a dial here, which this sub-dial shows tenths of a second. And this sub-dial is the seconds counter for the clock itself. So that's constantly running even when the chronograph is running. And of course the large red second hands here is for the chronograph. Now, as you can see, this is not a mecha quartz movement. There's a step motor that moves the second hands 1 second at a time. Tick, 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 tick. Which kind of makes the tachymeter not really all that useful. If you look at this, when you go in 1 second increments, particularly as you get up into the higher numbers, 1 second can mean the difference between, I don't know, it looks like 250 miles an hour and maybe 220 miles an hour. That's a pretty significant difference. A tachymeter really is not the smartest thing to have on a traditional quartz chronograph like this. But I guess they had to put something on the bezel ring, and they went with the tachymeter. They could have used a slide rule bezel, but again, with this type of ticking movement, it really would not have worked very well, I think. So that's your start-stop button. Now, one interesting thing is you can see here the this sub-dial has now stopped on the number 4, which means that whatever second is indicated by the second hand, there's an additional 4 tenths of a second. So you do have tenths of a second on here. That's a pretty nice feature. And then, of course, the reset button is down here, and that'll reset all 3 of these hands. Styling's pretty straightforward. As I said, they were kind of going for a classic look, but Victorinox only started making watches in 1989. They don't have any ancient things to hark back to. So you've got essentially a Super Oyster bracelet here, very much like the most modern Rolex models, and it does have solid end links, solid links throughout, although the deployant clasp, which is a butterfly style, does incorporate, well, at least a folded metal locking flap there, which is signed with the Victorinox logo. Not too unsightly there. That's nice. Polished center links, brushed outboard links. So with the exception of the clasp, this is straight up Rolex Oyster. Then we move to the case. Now the case shape is very uniquely Victorinox. They seem to like these sweeping lines here going from the case body into the lugs. But the lugs, as you can see, are twisted, and they are straight up Omega lugs. The dial is incorporating all kinds of features from other watches. You've got these little hash mark indices with large Arabic numerals at the 9 and the 3, very much a la, I don't know, Rolex Explorer maybe. You've got a surfboard dial, except It's not really surfboard shaped, is it? It's very parallel. I think that has something to do with the ETA G10 movement and its dial layout. So it's almost more of a skateboard dial than a surfboard dial. And most surfboard dials are not monochromatic, so it's not a true surfboard, but these two subdials are connected horizontally, so it's sort of we'll just go ahead and call it a surfboard dial. I mean a skateboard dial. As you can see, the rest of the dial background is done in a guilloche pattern. So you've got this sort of cubic geometric three-dimensional pattern. The Victorinox logo here at the 12 o'clock is filled in with lume. There's a nice lume on the indices and numerals, as well as the minute and hour hands. There's no lume on the second hands, but this is superluminova. There's not a lot of it anywhere here, so it doesn't hold a lot of. It doesn't hold the light for a really long time. Generally, by about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, if you wake up and look at the watch, it's pretty darn dim, but it's not too bad. I mean, it will work for several hours in the pitch darkness. So it does, of course, have a screw-down oyster back, which is nicely domed, no sharp edges. It's nice and smooth. A little bit of information printed on the back there. The crown doesn't screw down, it's just push and pull, and it does have it is signed with the Victorinox logo. They did a really nice job on this watch. I mean, if you look at all of the lines, the brushing on the sides, the polishing on these surfaces on the lugs, the fit and polish of these oval pushers, really nice work. I don't find any deficiencies. The chapter ring seems to be perfectly aligned. The crystal is nice and flush with the bezel ring. The bezel insert is lined up nicely. There's no unsightly gaps or weird things going on the case or bracelet. It's really nicely done watch. If it didn't have a very pedestrian quartz movement in it, you would think this was a much more expensive watch than it is. And of course, that's really the direction that Victorinox has been moving recently. They took over their main competitor, Wenger, several years ago. Both of them were making pretty straightforward, run-of-the-mill field watches. Wenger continues to make pretty straightforward field watches under the Swiss military logo. And Victorinox has made an effort to move more upmarket under the Swiss Army logo. You can probably tell from the reflection here, this is a sapphire crystal. It's triple anti-reflective coated. I don't know exactly what that means, since there's only an inside and an outside. I don't know how it can be triple coated. I guess maybe one of the sides has dual anti-reflective coats. And it works pretty well to kill the glare. You can see the fluorescence over the bench here, but it's not glaring. It's not washing out the video. Clearly, Victorinox was going for a classic look. They were going for a heritage model look, and they did it by ripping off a whole bunch of other companies. But that's that's just the nature of the business. That's what watch companies do. It's not unique to Victorinox. And it's not unique to this watch. All in all, I think it comes together pretty well. I bought this on deep discount. I probably wouldn't have gotten the champagne dial if I had just been buying this watch for my own purposes and picking from several. But I think all in all, it looks pretty classy. It has a nice look to it. I'm not a huge fan of analog chronographs, which I will go over in just a few moments. But all in all, I think it's a nice looking watch. It's certainly very well constructed. I mean, it's beautifully manufactured. Everything snaps together nicely. There's no unsightly gaps or weird things going on. Solid link bracelet. It looks like it's put together really well, and I would imagine that this watch would hold up for quite a few years. I did originally buy it as inventory for my little eBay concern that I have going on. I have another one that is for sale at the moment, but the purpose of this YouTube channel is not to promote my eBay business, so I'm not going to do that. But this one had a couple of weird things. Apparently somebody bought it and returned it and managed to scratch up the inside of the end links, changing the bracelet. So I can't really sell it as new. I paid so little money for it, I've decided to hold on to it and really test the accuracy of it. I'm going to go over that in the after as well. So let's get to the after. We'll move back over to the bookshelves and get on with it. Okay guys, so there you have it. There's the Victorinox Chrono Classic in a nutshell. Now this is just one model, the 241658. There are some other color variations. I think the Chrono Classic is also available on a leather strap as well as the stainless steel bracelet. But they're all basically the same functionally. They all feature ETA's G10.211 movement. The G10 movement from ETA, as you probably are all aware, ETA is a member of the Swatch group, so it's used widely within the Swatch group. Tissot's Quickster chronograph uses the G10.211. Hamilton has used the G10.211 in some chronograph variations of their khaki series. Certina has also used it. The G10 series in general is used widely throughout the watch industry in quartz chronographs. So this is not at all a rare or unusual movement. It is particularly accurate, and that is one thing I wanted to talk about. I've owned a number of analog chronographs over the years, from Seiko, from Citizen, from Victorinox, a few others, and I've sold every single one of them. Because to me, analog chronographs don't make a lot of sense, particularly quartz ones. And I'll explain to you why. Now, before anybody gets really upset, I understand that there are some analog chronographs out there that are just absolutely iconic and are gold standards for the industry in general. You know, the Omega Speedmaster, particularly the professional Moonwatch, the Breitling Chronomat. Is that right? Chronomat? I think it's right. And even some lesser known models like the Heuer Monaco. I mean, these are huge watches, and nothing I say is going to change your mind about those kind of watches. But does an analog chronograph make a whole lot of sense? I really don't think it does. You can buy, because the very best, the mechanical ones, are many thousands of dollars. And the cheaper ones that use a quartz movement are basically doing the same thing as even cheaper quartz digitals. Now, to my mind, the quartz digital makes a lot more sense. It gives a much more accurate reading than this watch, as I've already shown on the tabletop segment, is capable of showing you tenths of a second. This Casio G-Shock 5600, which is a fairly basic module, is capable of showing you accuracy to hundredths of a second. I have other digital watches that can give you readings out to thousandths of a second. Now, what's the actual practical value of being able to read thousandths or even hundredths of a second? Probably not very much, especially when you're relying on something as inaccurate and as analog as your thumb to turn the chronograph on and off. But the fact is, this shows you greater accuracy, or it shows you more detailed data, I guess is what I want to say. And really, an analog chronograph is a bit of an anachronism. I know I've already said there are some really iconic ones, and there was a good reason for analog chronographs. This technology was developed in the early 19th century, I think around 1820 or so. The first pocket watch style chronographs were invented, and mechanical analog chronographs were the only thing you had for timekeeping or for timing events up until quartz technology came out in the 1960s. So you're talking about 140 years maybe of analog chronographs being the only way to time individual events. And that was fine. But as soon as quartz came out, the accuracy of mechanical versions of the analog chronograph can't possibly compare. And while a watch like this has quartz accuracy, it doesn't have the data display of a much cheaper digital watch like this Casio. So does it really make a whole lot of sense? The hands on this watch are basically just repeaters. Those same streams of ones and zeros that are happening inside this watch to give you this digital LCD readout are happening inside this watch. It looks kind of like a mechanical watch. It displays its results very much like a mechanical watch, but it's doing what this watch is doing inside. So, I don't know. In a way, it kind of seems to me like those electric candles that people put out at Christmas time with the little bulbs that flicker like a flame. It seems a bit like an affectation to me. Another problem that I have with analog chronographs is you've got 3 subdials. You've got your main dial. You've got a total of 6 hands. The hands in the main dial that tell the time and give you the hours, the minutes, and, well, no, not the seconds. The seconds on the main dial are, in fact, for the chronograph function. But something always seems to be in the way of something else. One hand is almost always eclipsing another hand, and it's really distracting. It doesn't seem like it should happen all that often because, well, it should really only happen at, say, 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock, but it seems like whenever I want to check my watch or I want to check the seconds, specifically in this small subdial at the 6 o'clock position, the actual seconds, something else is in the way. It drives me crazy. That never happens with a digital watch. So, I don't know. I mean, I know that digital watches are not particularly cool nowadays. The G-Shock is kind of an exception to the rule, but I don't know. I don't know. If you guys have a strong opinion on it, tell me what you think. I like this watch. I do. I've liked every chronograph I ever bought, but analog chronographs just don't really do it for me. Now, so why do I have this watch? I forgot to cover the very last and most important thing. Why on earth do I have this watch after I just got done bashing analog chronographs and saying that I've sold off every other one I owned? Well, the reason I own this watch is that in addition to doing this YouTube thing, I've got a small, I don't want to call it a business, but a very, very minimal enterprise on eBay where I buy and sell watches, just 1 or 2 at a time. And I actually took this watch into inventory. And in getting ready to list it and taking the photographs of it, I noticed that the second hand, when you move the watch back and forth, the second hand, the big one, the chronograph second hand, moves back and forth just a fraction of a second. And I thought, oh gosh, that's got to be a problem. So I had another watch with this same movement, and I checked that, and I'm like, holy mackerel. That one moves also. So I Googled it to see if this was a common problem. And in actuality, it's not really a problem at all. It's a feature of the watch. Well, I wouldn't want to call it a feature, but it's just part of the watch's design. There's no mechanical brake on the second hand. And there's just a little bit of slack in the connection between the second hand and the step motor that drives it. So, it is what it is. But in doing that research, in finding out what was up with the second hand on this watch, I saw a lot of comments that said that this particular movement was incredibly accurate. So I decided to get out my Watch Check app on my phone and check to see just how accurate it is. Now, I ran it for about 2 weeks. And for about the first 2 weeks that I was checking the watch, the time per day would vary, plus or minus, plus, let's say, 0.2 seconds, minus 0.3 seconds, plus 0.1 seconds, minus 0.2 seconds. So there was a little bit of play there. But down the middle, the average was plus or minus 0.0 seconds per day. Now that's quartz chronometer standards kind of performance, which got me a little bit intrigued. Now just yesterday it finally went off of 0.0 after about 3 weeks of running it against the WatchCheck app. It's now showing minus 0.1 seconds per day, but it took about 3 weeks to get there. So that's pretty darn impressive. So instead of selling the watch, plus I found that it had a couple of scratches on it that I didn't notice when I bought it. So I've decided to keep this watch. Against my better instincts, I just got done saying I am not an analog chronograph guy, but I'm really fascinated to see just what kind of accuracy this thing shows over the long haul. I'll keep it maybe a year or so. If anyone is really interested in finding out what the final accuracy of this watch is over the long haul. Now we just went over to daylight savings time last night, so I had to reset the watch. That's going to throw off my readings a little bit, but I will continue to run it against the WatchCheck app and see what I come up with. If anybody's interested, go ahead and comment below, and I will certainly report back in the future with those findings. So in addition to commenting below, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and click the like button. If you hated it, go ahead and click the dislike button. You will not hurt my feelings at all. I want to know what you guys are interested in. But if you want to see more videos like this in the future from me, please, I'm begging you. This is e-begging at its best. Go ahead and click the subscribe button. YouTube is no longer about total views. They are about the number of subscribers that each channel has. So if you want to keep me here, please go ahead and subscribe. And if you're already a subscriber and you haven't done so already, go ahead and click the bell icon down below. What that'll do is YouTube will send you notifications when I make updates to the channel. You'll be able to keep track of all my latest content. I apologize that this is the first video I've done in about 2 weeks. This is mainly a weekend activity, and my last couple of weekends I've really been slammed, but I'm going to try keeping new content coming out. And I hope that when I do, I will see all of you here again at that time. Later, guys.